Welcome to your Daily 5 for Thursday, April 25th, 2024. I happened to be listening just by chance to a roundtable on, of all things, the new Taylor Swift album. And I don't listen to Taylor Swift, I don't have any problem with her, but I'm also not a fan, so I didn't even know she had a new album out. I wasn't really surprised because she seems to put out a lot of music. But their discussion was they were reading different reader inputs or listener inputs on their opinion on the album, which kind of ranged everywhere from adoration to boredom. And then they got into a discussion that I've heard many times over my life. It seems to crop up every 5 to 10 years, especially around popular artists, whether we're living in a monoculture. And it just so happened that this coincided with a post I had seen by a fairly well-known artist over on Blue Sky. Not fairly well known on Blue Sky, but fairly well known who's posting on Blue Sky, just so I make sure I say that correctly. And he was talking about the fact that he was sick of his art style and he was trying to find a new one. And that struck me as really odd because that's not something I've ever experienced myself. Not that I'm saying I'm a great artist or anything, but I've never looked at my work. I've been unhappy with my work, but not because of the style. I've always liked the fact that I have a style and I stick with it and I like it. But the idea that somebody would be sick of their own style. But then I thought, well, I remember back in the 90s when Jim Lee, at what you could argue was the height of his popularity, when he was coming right off the Claremont X-Men run, it really made him. He then went over to Image Comics and he did a comic called Death Blow. And if you look at those early issues in the art style, you might not even realize it's Jim Lee at first. I mean, there's certain things, if you're very familiar with his work, that are kind of giveaways, but only specific things, because a lot of the fine line work and some of the way that he approached the X-Men stuff that he did is all missing from Deathblow. He went with this very high contrast, almost Frank Miller Sin City style, where he's probably using like a heavy ink brush and very contrasty black and white colors with very little detail lines in between, or at least not compared to what he usually did. And I thought about that and went, well, okay, that was a big artist that was doing something outside of his range, really. And the idea of the monoculture, I was thinking about both these things together because I thought, well, if Jim Lee were to do that today, if this was, if we had fast forwarded 20 years from when that happened, it would probably be a Kickstarter comic or a Patreon comic. And he could arguably not be doing regular comics anymore because he could be successful doing that stuff to an audience that appreciated it more than the mainstream stuff. And so this idea of the monoculture, which, like I said, I've heard many times over my life, I think it has an inherent shelf life. I don't think it lasts because one of the big things, and I've talked about this before, about the internet and the pervasiveness of the internet, the fact that we're all online all the time. I mean, there is a flood of garbage and noise, but at the same time, the barriers to what you can get to, sorry, I was almost choking on something there, the barriers to letting you experience new art are almost eradicated, which was not true when I was younger. The idea of a monoculture when I was younger was much stronger because the systems for promoting and rewarding art all promoted and rewarded very similar things. Now, of course, if you looked, you could find stuff outside of that, but you had to really look. It wasn't as easy to find. There wasn't Bandcamp. There wasn't Patreon or OnlyFans or all this stuff where people can put their content and people can hit it directly and support them directly without having to worry about going through a middleman or some kind of middle promotion company, because that's where the monoculturistic stuff comes from. A group of people who think, well, this is all that's going to sell, so this is all we're going to show people. And that was the only things you could see. Well, that's not true anymore. You can go to so many different avenues and find so many different things that the monoculture is inherently aging out. Younger people are not going to care about what's on the top billboard or what is in the Nielsen ratings. All this stuff is already basically obsolete. And so what that does is it allows new art, new artists, different approaches to come out. And even bad art is good art because even if something comes out and there's not really anything inherently valuable about it, it could inspire somebody to do something valuable with a seed of an idea that bad art inspired. Those things happen all the time. I've watched bad movies and reviewed many of them, if you've listened to the show for a while, where I've said somebody could take this core idea in this not well-made movie and they could make something good with it. They could take this idea or this basic premise and they could make a good movie. This just isn't it. That doesn't mean the idea or some part of the idea isn't good. It just wasn't realized at the time. And that's what I mean about the idea of the monoculture. It is inherently going to go away. It does not last because people, fortunately, younger generations, to my confusion often, but this is a good thing, do not like the same things that older generations do, by and large. And that allows them to think differently. It allows them to appreciate different things. And that benefits everybody. One type of art of any kind is bad. So I am not worried about the monoculture because it's not going to last. Later.